What's good, y'all? My name is One Zendarius, and I'm back with more of the 101 in Warframe. In the last video, I explained of I explained the three various Warframes that you start off with, which is Excalibur, Mag, and Volt. In this video, I'm going to explain some of the stats that the Warframes, the weapons, and pretty much your companions have in their entirety. And as usual, if you like the video, or if there's anything that I need to work on, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for any new updates that may come along in this time. Also, if you got the time, be sure to follow my socials. Also, I'll have a link in the description below that will explain where all my information is coming from. With all that said, let's get back into the 101. Anyway, when I explained the various Warframes, you may have seen on the side of the screen the various different options on the side right here. Each Warframe has their own stats, and each stat is depicted depending on what type of stat the Warframe has. Right now, these are just the stats that I have modified for different. These are pretty much the stats that I have alongside having mods themselves. Now, to help go through this, I'm gonna go highlight upgrade, which will explain the different abilities that I have within the different frames. Now, I want to explain the different options on the side, which is right here, and I'll explain everything in its entirety. Now, all the way at the tippy top, you have capacity. Capacity is basically the skill points of Warframe. Every time you add mods or anything such as that, you use however many skill points that's native to the actual ability to the mod itself. Each mod has a number. Although that number is referred to as drain, I'm going to refer to it as skill points used to upgrade your frame. Right now, my capacity or my skill points is 0, since I pretty much use them all for my Warframe in its entirety. And my capacity that I have is 74. Now, there are some things that increase your capacity. One of the most common ways to increase that is by, obviously, ranking up your weapon. And every time you rank up your weapon, or Warframe, or Companion, you get 1 skill point. So, when you max out your weapon and whatnot, the maximum amount of skill points you can get is 30. The two other ways you can increase your skill points is by using this special item, which is called an Orokin reactor or an Orokin catalyst. Using one of these doubles your capacity, which means instead of 30, you have 60. Now, the second way to increase it is by increasing your overall rank. Now, to note, to increase your master rank, and I didn't want to explain this until much later, whenever you increase your mastery rank, or MR, you increase your skill points by 1. So, the 3 ways you can increase your skill points is by ranking up your weapon, using a special item such as an Orokin catalyst or an Orokin reactor, and by upgrading your mastery rank. Every time you increase these, you increase your capacity by 1 every time. And this happens across all weapons. The only thing that increases your capacity across all weapons is your mastery rank. So right now, since I have a mastery rank of 18, every weapon that I have and every Warframe that I have is always going to have 18 skill points right off the bat. Any skill points I earn after that will come from the actual Warframe itself, or weapon. Now, that's capacity in a nutshell. Each mod I have has a certain amount of skill points. Every time I use those type of skill points, that's how much gets taken from my skill point or capacity. So, for example, in order for me to use Streamline, it costs me 9 skill points. So when I have 9 skill points, it will get taken from this. So if I have 74 and I take off 9, that's going to leave you with 63 skill points. Now the unique thing about this is that every time you take a mod off of a weapon or Warframe itself, it refunds those skill points. You could do this as much as you want. There's no limit to how many times you could do it. Because this is where builds come in for the Warframes. But there is another special technique that you can use to reduce how much these right here cost. This right here is referred to as a forma. A forma is basically like a golden puzzle piece that you use to polarize different weapons or different Warframes. The downside to doing this is that if you use one of these, and the description right here says, this shape altering component is fundamental to Orokin construction. Allows you to change the polarity of a mod slot on a Warframe, companions, or weapon, and then resets their affinity to unranked. This can only be used on level 30 Warframes, companions, or weapons. So, whenever you slot one of these mods, they may have polarity slots. But for the sake of this, I'm going to go ahead and select a Warframe that I haven't played as yet, Ivara. I haven't done anything for this frame yet, and she is lovely. I do love her. Anyway, like I said before, I'm mastery rank 18. I start off with 18 skill points, which means I don't need to really upgrade this. Which means, since I haven't upgraded Ivara, I'm going to have a total of 48 skill points when I upgrade her to her absolute maximum. Anyway, these are the mod slots. And within each mod slot, you have what are called polarities, which is this right here. The name of the polarities are as follows. You got Madurai, Vazarin, Naramon, Zenuric, and Umbra. Umbra is unique because it's unique to one frame in this game, which is referred to as Excalibur Umbra. But you also have Exilus mods as well. Anyway, I'm going to go through it and I'll explain the different types of mods and how they, well, at the same time, well, I'll explain that in another video. I don't want to cross myself up or anything like that. Anyway, every time I use one of these slots, it costs me a certain amount of skill points. Anyway, yeah. This is a perfect example right here. For example, flow right here increases my max energy by 25%. Now, the thing about this is that each mod has its own sort of polarity. And each polarity affects your Warframe in various different ways. This right here, as I explained before, is a polarity slot. Now, if I put flow right here, if I grab flow and I use it in one of these regular slots, it's going to cost me 4 skill points. So right now, my capacity is 18. After doing that, it cost me 4 skill points. So naturally, my capacity now is 14. That's because I used 4 of those skill points to install flow. As long as I have the capacity or the skill points for it, I can attach as many mods as I want. However, if I put flow or any other mod onto a slot that it's not compatible with, it doubles the mod's drain or skill points. So what you want to do is not do that. If the mod slot is red, if the polarity is red, that means you have an unmatching mod in the slot and it costs more. Now you see before that it costs 4 skill points to equip it, right? Right now it's 5, which pretty much increase how many skill points I used, which is a big no. Don't ever do that. However, and I want to put this back here. Since I have 14, what would happen if I put this into this slot? Well, the great thing is it cuts the mod cost in half. So instead of it costing 4, it only costs 2. This is where builds come into play. Whenever you upgrade your Warframe, companion, or weapons, your mods play a huge role in how you build around your frame itself. So, everything you want to do, you should put matching mod slots. You should put matching mods into matching mod polarities. But the mod polarities give you a clue into which type of abilities you should have on your frame as opposed to what you shouldn't have on your frame. Anyway, the idea behind this is that with capacity, you want to make sure you're using the right mods for the right slot for the right situation. Up here, you have different configurations. Each configuration you have increases, but you can pretty much switch between different configurations. Like, for example, in configuration 1, you can have your solo mod slots for when you're playing by yourself. Configuration B, you can have mods for when you play with, certain group of, frames for when you're playing with, a squad. Configuration C could be used for something else, such as farming or doing various different things, such as you could do it for survival, you can have it for defense, or you can have it for anything. Basically, if you use these mod slots, these configurations, it cuts down a lot on what you need to do. Basically, this pretty much cuts your entire time down to a fraction. But yeah. So in summary, with capacity, make sure you use the type of mods that you would want to use for your frame. And if you want to increase this, rank up your weapons or your warframes. Use special items to rank up. Use special items to double your mod capacity, or just rank up your mastery. Anyway, now down to the list of the items right here. As I explained in the last video, each warframe has their strength and weakness, and each of those strengths and weaknesses are dependent on the stats that each warframe has. Each warframe has 5 different stats, and under those 5 stats, you'll have 4 additional ones. On the top, you have armor. Now, armor reduces damage to health by 29.4%. Shields are not affected by armor. So basically, the higher your armor rating, the less health damage you take. So, you want to make sure this is high. So basically, since my armor rating is 125, I take 29.4% less damage when enemies attack my health. Energy. Used to cast Warframe abilities and can be replenished during missions. This energy right here is the starting Warframe energy. Each Warframe has starting energy depending on what type of Warframe it is. Some Warframes start with 100 energy. Some Warframes start with 50. Others start with above average, which is 125, 150, 175, or 200. As you level up, your energy will fully restore, and it may raise, and it may increase it overall. So your energy won't stay at 200 perpetually. It will increase as you rank up your Warframe. Your armor rating will also increase as well, and so will your other stats. Your health. Your health is pretty self-explanatory. The amount of damage a Warframe can take before going into bleed out. Naturally, the higher your health is, the longer you'll last in combat. Shields. Shields absorb damage except toxin. Depleted shields grant a moment of invulnerability. Damage interrupts charge. So, in order for enemies to deal damage directly to your health, they gotta deplete your shields first. There are some damages that go past shields though. Of course, toxin. Naturally, when it comes to toxin, when it goes through your shield, you'll immediately begin taking health damage. So even if you do have shields, toxin will drain it completely. Now, sprint speed. This determines how fast a Warframe moves. So naturally, the fastest sprint speed I've seen so far, I believe, is 2.0. Or close to that. Anyway, The sprint speed is how fast your Warframe goes from walking speed to a full out sprint. And yes, each Warframe do has certain sprint speed. Some Warframes have lower sprint speeds. Some Warframes have higher than average sprint speed. There are ways to increase it as well. But of course, I will go into that at a later video. Now, you have the 4 other abilities. And these 4 other abilities is duration, efficiency, range, and strength. Duration modifies the Warframe abilities and the energy cost of toggled abilities. Hover over each ability to see how stats are affected. In other words, duration determines how long sustained abilities last and how long certain abilities, basically it decreases the cost of abilities that sustain. Basically, sustain abilities and abilities that last, abilities that have seconds next to them are increased, and it decreases the energy cost of abilities when you toggle them on and off, so to speak. Efficiency modifies the energy cost of Warframe abilities. The minimum energy cost is 1/4 of the base value. So basically, efficiency determines how cheap the abilities are to cast. So here's an example. If your efficiency is 200%, basically all your abilities is cut. Basically, all the abilities that you have is cut in half. So the abilities that normally cost 100 will cost 50. Any of the abilities that normally cost 20 is cost 10. You pretty much get the picture. So basically, efficiency cuts down the cost of abilities that Warframes uses. Range modifies the range of Warframe abilities. Now, of course, if you want to know how abilities are, done, you can hover over the abilities, which are at the bottom of the screen itself. Now, the range modifies how far the ability reaches. So, if normal Warframe abilities may reach to 10 meters, if the range is increased to 200, it's doubled basically. So instead of the ability range being 10, it would be 20 meters. And instead of a range of 25, it would be 50. It basically doubles the range of any and all abilities you have in their entirety. So, that's range in a nutshell.
I didn't understand that.
Strength. Strength modifies Warframe abilities. Now, strength modifies how strong Warframe abilities are. The higher your strength is, the more damage your Warframe abilities do. So, again, just like the other abilities, if you have 200%, your Warframe abilities are doubled. So if your base ability deal 500 damage, you're going to be dealing 1,000 damage overall. And I had no idea why Bixby did that, but anyway, we're going to ignore that. But yeah, but all in all, this is the Warframe's core ability stats. And as I explained before, each ability is different based on the different stats that each Warframe has. So some Warframes are created equal, some Warframes aren't created equal, as they have abilities that's unique to them and unique to them alone. Now, that's the abilities for the Warframes. Now, I want to explain the different types of stats on your weapons in their entirety. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about the weapons, as the weapons run off the basic fundamentals of the actual Warframe itself. However, there are some things that are a bit different from the weapon itself and the Warframe abilities. And I'm going to go across them as follows. Now, you notice that the Warframe ability, that the upgrades that I have for the Amperex is already at rank 30. This is what a rank 30 weapon is. Anyway, when my weapon reaches rank 30, that means I can't rank it up anymore. But as usual, I can polarize it to give it another polarity slot, but this uses an overworking catalyst. The catalyst is basically the reactor of primary weapons, secondary weapons, and melee weapons. So whenever you want to upgrade melee weapons primary weapons or secondary weapons, you want to use a no working catalyst. Whenever you want to upgrade or double the mod capacity of a Warframe, you need a reactor, which obviously makes sense within itself. But anyway, you'll notice that you see a bunch of different stats for these as well. Now, the stats for your primary weapon and your secondary weapon and your melee weapon are unique between one another. Now, you'll notice that you see a bunch of different options right here. But if there's something that you don't understand or don't really get, you can mouse over it and it'll give you a rough description of the weapon itself. And I'm going to go in order of this as well. Accuracy. How far projectiles will deviate from the reticle. Higher values are more accurate. Accuracy improved while aiming. Naturally, anybody who plays any shooter game in its entirety, accuracy determines how often your shots hit targets. So obviously, the lower your accuracy is, the least likely your shots are going to hit your target. The higher accuracy obviously states that you're going to hit your target more often. But I'm not going to go into too much detail, as if you play first-person shooters or any shooter in general, you know what accuracy is. Critical chance. Chance that any given attack will do bonus critical hit damage. Values over 100% have a chance to become orange critical hits, and over 200% have a chance to become red. Now, critical hit chance determines how often the attack will critical. So, when I began playing this game, I at first didn't worry about this and didn't even bother with critical chance. It wasn't until later on I began to understand that critical chance determines how often my critical hits will trigger. So, the higher your critical hit chance, the more times you will critical hit enemies no matter what. And since my critical hits are around 80%, that means I'm doing yellow criticals almost all the time, 80% of the time. The other 20% I'm dealing regular damage. Critical multiplier. Critical hit damage is multiplied by this value. The added damage is doubled for orange critical hits and tripled for red. So the critical multiplier determines how hard and how much more damage your critical hits trigger, or how much more damage your critical hits deal. So critical chance and critical multiplier goes hand in hand. The higher your critical chance, the more often your critical hits trigger. The higher your critical multiplier, the more damage your criticals do. So naturally, since these go hand in hand, you want to make sure you have a high critical chance and a high critical multiplier, which you will start just tearing through enemies left, right, and center. Which means enemies' health bars will just delete themselves the moment you start attacking them. Fire rate. Maximum number of projectiles that can be launched per second. Yeah, this is on a per second basis. So every time you pull the trigger, your fire rate determines how many rounds can be fired within that 1 second. So for this weapon, every second I'm draining 12 rounds off the weapon. But you pretty much know the fire rate. The higher the fire rate, the more rounds you put out into an enemy in its entirety. In some cases, it's good to have a higher fire rate, and in some cases, it's best not to have too high a fire rate. Magazine. The number of ammo rounds a weapon can hold. Now, this is subjective between the different types of weapons, as some weapons may only have 1 round, other weapons may only have 2, other weapons may have up to 300 rounds or more. You can use mods to determine how big the magazine size for your weapons are. Now, the magazine size determines how much ammo you hold within your weapon itself. And you can modify this, of course, with mods. So, you pretty much get the picture. The more mods you attach that have magazine size, the higher this will be. Multi-shot. Projectiles fired per shot without consuming additional ammo. Each projectile has its own chance to apply critical hits or status effects. What multi-shot means is that every time you fire a weapon, you have a chance to fire 1 more. But in this particular case, multi-shot is only 1, which means you're only going to fire one round at all times. However, you can increase this by using certain mods to a point where you're actually shooting 2 rounds every second. well, 2 round. Well, you have a chance of firing 2 rounds. So this is also runs off the probability of kind of similar to a critical chance, but just like critical chance, each shot has its own chance to apply critical hits or status effects, which means one shot may critical, another shot may not. But again, you can use mods to increase the critical. You can use mods to increase the multi-shot chance. Noise. Unalerted enemies will react to weapons being fired if they are alarming, but not if they're silent. Now, this makes a huge difference. If the noise is alarming, that means enemies will always hear the weapon being shot. But if it's silent, enemies won't see it and they won't be detected. A great example of this would be is bows and thrown weapons. Bows can't be detected because it's a silent projectile weapon. If an enemy is alerted when you fire the weapon, it's because the enemy themselves see that the weapon killed an ally of theirs. However, if an enemy is facing away and you shoot another enemy, the enemy won't hear the shot at all and they'll still continue on with their business. That kill will count as a assassination. So, all in all, if you're doing spy missions or missions where you gotta free allies, it's best to use weapons that are silent. That way, enemies aren't immediately alerted that you have a weapon that is alarming, because it will ruin anything. Reload. Time in seconds to refill the magazine from empty. Basically, this determines how short a time it takes to reload said weapon. So when you reload the weapon, in this particular case, if I reload my Amperex, it takes 2.6 seconds. Basically, it takes almost 3 seconds to reload the whole weapon. And again, there are mods that decrease the reload time, which is also good. So the less time you spend reloading, the more time you'll have dealing damage to enemies. Riven dispositioning is sort of its own thing, so I'm not going to go into detail with this. But I'm still going to read the description itself. Modifies the performance of an equipped Riven mod. More filled dots indicate stronger status. I'm not going to go into detail with that, as it's, something entirely. Status. The chance that a hit will apply a status effect based on the types of damage the weapon inflicts. Basically, this determines how often the status effects that the weapon has will trigger on an enemy. Now, it runs off the same exact thing as critical chance, as, it has an 80% chance to, hit critical hits to critical enemies and deal increased damage. Status is the same thing. The higher the status, the more often the status itself will trigger. So since my status chance is 35.2, it will trigger about a third of the time. Like 1 in every 3 shots is going to deal a status damage, but it deals it on a per shot basis. The trigger here determines what type of trigger the weapon has itself, and how the weapon is operated. How the weapon operates when the trigger is pressed. Held trigger weapons create continuous beam and have a short warm-up time to reach full damage. In some cases, when you use weapons such as machine guns or chain guns, depending on how long it takes the trigger itself, it will wind up slowly and then it'll start firing. Some weapon you'll see this more often with weapons that has held, semi, auto, full auto, single shot, burst. That's pretty much what it means. If you play first person shooters, you pretty much know what goes on. Now, down here you have damage. Each weapon has its own damage type. But for this one, its damage type was mostly electricity. But anyway, and this is a pretty advanced type of damage. Anyway, radiation. Combined from heat and electricity damage. Most effective against alloy armor. Radiation status effects confuses enemies to attack everything nearby at random. So in other words, radiation is an ability that deals damage to enemies. Well, not deals damage to enemies, but any person or any enemy under radiation will attack their allies or anybody else they deem an enemy. So basically, you can kind of consider it a sort of face-checking damage type, which means if you hit an enemy with radiation damage, that enemy itself will become a pseudo ally, but will still fight against you if you get close enough. Now, I know some stats in here are a bit different, but I'm going to see if I can find a weapon that has various stats onto it. As a matter of fact, no, not that one. I'm gonna see if I can. As a matter of fact, yeah, here we go. This is perfect. Anyway, this is a perfect example of a weapon itself, of a weapon that I sort of use every now and then. But again, the trigger for this one is a semi. Basically, what a semi trigger is that I shoot as fast as I pull the trigger. That's basically all it means. Anyway, back to the rest of the damage type. On the other weapon, you couldn't see all the damage types because it's a weapon that deals elemental damage no matter what. Anyway, there are different types of damage. There are 3 core types of damage, and there's 4 types of elemental damage. And I'm going to go into detail about the 4 types of elemental the 4 types of elemental damage, but I'm going to go into detail about the 3 different types of damage there is. Starting with impact. Impact. Most effective against shields. Impact status increases the chance that the target will be vulnerable to a finisher at low health. Now, impact is effective against shields as it decreases the amount of it increases the time it increases the amount of time it takes shields to recharge, and it increases shield damage. On top of that, it increases the chance that the target is vulnerable to finisher at low health. Basically, if an enemy is under the effects of blind or they're on the ground, basically, if you finish them off with a finisher or an assassination, the enemy will take additional damage. So, and impacts, to tell when an enemy is under the impact damage debuff, they will glow blue. Puncture. Most effective against armor. Puncture status reduces the target's damage output by up to 75%. So, puncture damage is good against yellow health bars, while impact damage is good against shields, which is blue health bars. Puncture is great against yellow health bars. So on top of that, it also reduces the target's damage as well, up to 75% per stack. 75%. So basically, 1 stack is 25%, 2 stacks is 50%, and 3 stacks is 75%. So basically, they deal reduced damage up to 75%, which means you take less shield damage or less health overall. So this is good for when you're fighting off against enemies that has a high damage output. And puncture damage and the puncture debuff will be color-coded yellow. Slash. Most effective against flesh. Slash status ignores the target's armor and causes them to bleed for extra damage over a short duration. Slash damage isn't in its entirety. It's pretty much the damage over time debuff that affects a person's depending on what type of health bar the person's health is. It will tick down on a person's either armor or will tick down on a person's shield. Basically, it would delay shield recharge over time. But slash damage is more effective against flesh, which is the which is the red health bar. And slash damage is color coded red, and you can tell because the debuff of slash damage will deal spurts of blood will come out basically. Now, I'm going to go into Toxin. Toxin is most effective against organic corpus enemies since it ignores shields. Toxin status causes the target to take additional damage over a short duration. Now, Toxin damage is similar to Slash, but it deals additional damage against organic type enemies. Organic type enemies are corpus or infested. Enemies that has flesh and blood, basically. Since Grineer is armored mostly, Grineer won't suffer too much from Toxin, but it will still deal damage to him overall. Now, let me see. Taking off Pistol Pestilence. Heated Charge. Oh, crap. I forgot. Let me get rid of that. Alright. Heat damage. Heat is most effective against infested flesh. Heat status causes the target to burn for extra damage and slightly reduces their armor over a short duration. Now, heat status effect causes enemies to be on fire, so to speak. And when enemies are on fire, they panic and they start running around trying to put out the fire. Now, heat is great against different types of it's great against infested, since they have just pure health bars. And since it deals additional damage to infested flesh, it also reduces the armor. It also reduces their armor, which is basically the damage they take, which is good because if you have a weapon that deals heat damage and some sort of native damage from one of the 3 core damage types, you're dealing additional damage. So heat damage is pretty good against infested overall. Let's put that away. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. Deep freeze. Cold. Most effective against shields. Cold status causes enemies to move up to 70% slower. So, cold damage does increased damage to shields. So if you combine impact damage with cold damage, you're draining corporate shields in a heartbeat. So this pairs great with impact. The other thing about cold is that it slows enemies down. So basically enemies are pretty much 2/3 slower than they would normally be. Or should I say close to 3 times slower than they would be. As long as they're under the effects of, cold. So this is good for slowing enemies down to ultimately stopping them. Now let's see. There's one more. Nope, not that. Yeah. Where is it? Convulsion, which is electricity. Electricity. Most effective against robotics. Electricity status changes between nearby enemies, applying a stun effect and extra damage. The thing about electricity is that excuse me. The thing about electricity damage is that any enemy sorry. Don't know what that's about. Anyway, electricity, and I apologize for all that. I have no idea. I need a drink of water. Anyway, electricity. Wow, I'm just screwing up today. Anyway, when an enemy is under the effects of electricity, if any allies come nearby, they take damage immediately. So, the enemy under the effect of electricity is a giant lightning rod. So, if you shoot an enemy in a crowd, any enemy around them is going to take tick damage, and on top of that, they're stunned for the duration of that happening. So when that happens, the idea is to finish them off as fast as you possibly can. But since it's most effective against robotics, it's a lot better. It's a lot better to fight, MOAs or drones with these things. So that's electricity damage. Now, on my last weapon, you see that it was radiation damage. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but I'm going to go ahead and I'll show you exactly what it is. Wow, she's great. And I didn't even do anything with her yet. If you go into the codex, you can also look up the different damage types as well. Damage. So, if you're not clear on which damage types are which, this is where you can go to look them up. yeah, as usual, these are the three core damage types, which are the physical damages that I explained before. And these are the four elemental damage types. Of course, I'll explain this a bit in a more advanced version of the 101. Anyway, this just anything. All this just determines is that basically enemies can be resistant or weak to different damage types. However, there are this is some more advanced stuff. Mods can be used to create additional elemental damage types besides the four main ones. For this one, you got blast, radiation, gas, magnetic, viral, and corrosive. Basically, if you look this up, you'll see that if you combine different elements, you'll get sub-elements, so to speak. Anyway, so right now, that's pretty much all there is to explain about the different damage types in Warframe. Now, the different stats and the different abilities that you have on each weapon is determined solely by what you have on it. So, you can have any type of abilities or any type of mods on your weapons to do various things. And the neat thing is you can switch out different weapons with different elements, so you can have certain elements work with certain weapons against certain enemies, which makes you a more effective hunter and makes farming much less tedious, so to speak. So yeah, as usual, that's the end of this video. Appreciate you guys for stopping by. And again, if you have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments below. Also, if you haven't, you can follow me on some of my socials in the description, and I'll link the actual website to where you can look all this information up, which is also going to be in the description down below. Anyway, that's it for me, guys, and I'll catch you guys later.